Oh, hello there! You're probably expecting a follow-up to my thoughts on Little Witch Academia, right? Well, I know I said I would give you my thoughts as the show progressed, but then I happened to make a breakthrough in my research. So, as such, I never really got the time to do it. However, all you wonderful people deserve a follow-up, so I will give you my overall thoughts on the TV series of Little Witch Academia. My final conclusion is... it's good. It's fun and amusing. Definitely worth watching. Okay, well, if we're all through that, I believe I will get back to my research.
The people have been waiting a long time for this. Don't you even think of pulling that crap with them, Kay.
Fine, fine. I suppose a more in-depth way of putting it is that I did enjoy the series quite a lot. It was a funny and fun adventure through and through. Previously, I praised it on breaking away from a lot of the cliché tropes that a lot of series seem to fall into these days, and that does remain true. For the first half of it, at least. During the second half of the series, it did begin to resemble your standard light-hearted anime more and more, and while that's not necessarily bad, per se, it was just such a shame after seeing it break away from so many clichés to see it become so much more, well, generic, quite honestly. That's not to say I didn't enjoy it or find it a good topic of study, but it was a shame to see it go down this path.
Did you ever figure out how this show was able to do an intelligent Twilight episode?
Oh, I hit a dead end there, Emma. That's something that goes beyond science. Although, speaking of plot, while I did find myself very much enjoying it, there were a lot of things that were brought up that were never actually resolved. However, I do know a lot of this can be chalked up to the franchise's deal with Netflix. During an interview, the creator did say that he did have to cut out a lot of things he wanted to do with the plot and certain characters in order to satisfy his deal with Netflix. And that is a shame, really, because not only does it mean that certain plot points are never resolved, it also means certain characters become completely superfluous by the end, as it slowly becomes just the Akko and Diana show. But again, it's not a bad series by any stretch of the imagination. On the contrary, it's a very good series. However, with all my expectations for it when the early episodes did things so differently, well, it's just a shame that so much had to be cut. My biggest hope for the franchise is that it does get a second season and the creator is able to add in all those elements he had to cut out. I mean, yes, some of them would have to be reworked, but I think there's a lot of untapped potential in this franchise that the TV series was only really beginning to scratch the surface of. Then again, I thought the same thing with the OVAs, but then we did end up getting a TV series, so you never know what the future holds. If there's one thing you learn in the realm of knowledge, it's never say never, whatever you do.
Please, for all our sakes, don't start singing.
Why not?
Remember what happened last time you started singing? That Gabumon hung himself.
Well, at least we now know how it responds to certain sounds, Emma, my dear.
I honestly question whether I'm studying under a supervillain here. Oh, and by the way, that's the breakthrough he made with his research.
Well, this series does show how science can be misused. I do have to say, the idea of combining magic and science is an interesting one. One that has been done before, to be sure, but it is still an interesting area of study. I mean, my own research is decades ahead of Qua's, but it's very cute how far she's come and how she thinks that that's impressive. But back on point, I do hope there will be a future for this franchise, but if this is it, I'd be satisfied. I suppose I'd best discuss my findings on the characters. I'd better be careful here, or else I might just trigger the fanbase. Eh?
You'd think somebody so smart would be able to come up with much more clever puns.
Hush, Emma! We're heading into territory engraved deeply in Tumblr here. You remember what I taught you about that?
Right. Tumblr is the underbelly of any fanbase, but is always lurking just around the corner.
Correct! Oh, look at that, there's hope for you yet, girl. Anyway, I need to run a quick scan of this series and find out what the trigger word is. And no, this time that wasn't a pun. Okay.
Is that a scouter?
Sort of. I've modified it a little bit to detect more than just power levels. Trust primitive minds such as the Saiyans or the Freezer Force to only be interested in such base facts. Though I do hope this trigger word comes out soon, otherwise people are going to start asking me when the next... Oh, there it is! The trigger word is Diako.
So it's a ship then?
Well, yes, if we must call it by such a name. Okay, now we know the word to avoid in this discussion. Well, that's going to be a challenge to be sure, but hey, I'm a genius. I build robots for fun. I'm sure I can handle this.
Plus, if they... Oh, let's be honest here, considering who I'm talking to. When they come and lynch you, you can always just jump to another timeline, right?
Now you're catching on. Still, I would prefer to avoid such trouble. So if you've come here expecting me to talk about that topic, well, you go and invent a device to travel to an alternate timeline where I did talk about it, because I'm sure as heck not going to do it here. Anyway, let's start off by talking about the main character herself, Akko. Akko has aspirations. I can't fault her for that. She's full of energy and passion for what she does, much like myself, and I can respect that. Oh, and she never gives up even though she sucks at almost everything, so that's commendable.
I knew you couldn't give out compliments for too long. Your head would explode.
Yes, well, we can't have that happening again.
What do you mean again?
Later, Emma. Anyway, Akko is a likeable enough character. For the most part. But there are times where she can be a bit too overly positive.
Is there such a thing?
There is indeed. There are times when it's cute that she just wants what's best for everybody, but there's also times where you do have to just face facts and accept that things can't always go the way you want them to go. While there are plenty of episodes where Akko does learn this, it's a lesson that never really seems to stick, because by the beginning of the next episode she's back to her normal, overly cheery self. The only time this lesson really does seem to stick is right at the end of the series.
But I'd argue that's a tad more realistic. Sometimes you do have to learn a lesson over and over again before it finally sticks. Sometimes it's when it hits you hardest that it finally gets through to you.
Well, maybe that's the case for some, Emma.
You know I'm studying how poisons work, right?
In any case, Akko's overly cheery attitude could become really frustrating when it came to the topic of old traditions. Now, there is something to be said for challenging an older way of thinking against the way the modern world works, and deciding whether or not it's time to throw an old tradition out, or find a way to find a compromise between the old and the new. That in itself is a very good thing for a story to have, and heck, it was done brilliantly in the Enchanted Parade OVA. For the most part, that seems to be what they're trying to go for with Akko in theory, and sometimes they succeed, and other times it comes off as her just having a very immature view of the world, but we're supposed to just go along with it because she's Akko, she's the protagonist, she's Japanese, ergo, she can do no wrong. There are times where she does have a point, but there were plenty of other times where I found myself saying, Akko, I know this is a hard pill for you to swallow, but tradition is tradition, and it's not your place to comment on it.
She's only a teenager, Kay. You can't really criticise her for not being as mature as you are.
That's not what I'm doing, Emma. Well, no more so than I critique others for not being as smart as I am.
But you do that all the time!
I'm merely saying that that theme in and of itself has to have a compromise between the protagonist reworking an old tradition and accepting that there's just some things in the world she can't change. But again, sometimes it does do that, and I'm normally very happy when it does. I don't want to come off as overly negative here, making it sound like I don't like Akko, because I do genuinely like her. I just think there are times where she's overly immature, and the only really lasting development for her as a character comes at the very end of the series. Plus, there were certain episodes where her dialogue pretty much was just chariot, 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 chariot. Then again, she is an anime protagonist. At the end of the day, is it really any different from saying Hokage or Pirate King over and over again? I suppose it isn't.
Already different from you saying science, 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 science repeatedly, you darn hypocrite.
Fine, fine, I won't knock her for that. But in any case, I suppose it's time for us to move on to talking about Lotte and Susie. Yes, I'm banding them both together, and there is a reason for that. But let's talk about them individually very quickly first. Lotte remains as cute and lovable as she was in the OVAs, and out of the two of them has the most episodes dedicated to her, though it's still not a lot. She doesn't really undergo much in the way of character development, sadly. I would have liked to have seen her come out of her shell a little bit by the end of the series. Or at the very least see where things went with Frank. That subplot is dropped very quickly, hence why I don't see it as a spoiler to bring it up. Unfortunately, Lotte being the standard cute, borderline Lolita character, does mean she's going to attract a lot of...
Oh, Lotte is my new waifu.
What the heck is that?
that kind of audience.
Oh, I want to peek at her panties so badly. Oh, she's so kawaii. Oh, her glasses are so adorable. Oh, I want to hug a pillow of her for my collection. I'm gonna write lots of fanfic about her and my OC, who's totally not me at all. I'm Pete, he's Etep. See? We're totally different.
Pete, get lost! Get back into your cage, you filthy creature!
But I want to make Lotte my new waifu. Me and Lotte, and Lotte's panties. Together. Forever.
Away with you!
Ah!
Back in your cage with all your filthy polygamy stuff! And if you come out again, I swear I'm gonna cut it off for real this time! Filthy creature.
What the heck was...
Pervy Pete, the lowest of the low when it comes to anime fans, goes around acting perverse about the young-looking characters and gives the entire community a bad name. Well, worse than it already has.
So, why is he living with us in this place?
Well, I need a guinea pig to test certain experiments on, and seeing as animal testing is frowned upon these days, and human testing is completely out of the question, I thought I'd meet people halfway and use... that.
You're either the world's greatest hero, or literally the worst person ever. Or both at the same time somehow.
Oh, you can rest assured, any experiments I test on him are sure to hurt. A lot. Remember kids, no anime fan wants to be a pervy Pete. He's not a good person. But sadly, Lotte's type of character does attract a lot of people like him, making it just really unpleasant for everybody. And hey, Susie doesn't fare much better. But let's move on from talking about that and talk about her as a character. For such a popular and funny character, I'm surprised how little focus there actually is on Susie. Of all 25 episodes, she has a grand total of 1 dedicated to her. And it's questionable as to whether that episode actually happened or not. Watch the episode, you'll see what I mean. Susie was so hilarious in the OVAs. It's such a shame to see her so badly underutilised in the TV series, particularly in the second half. It's almost criminal how little they use a character with so much potential. Like I said, she was a lot of people's favourite character in the OVAs, so why they don't use her more is anybody's guess. But the worst part of it all is, the two of them become completely superfluous by the end of the series. They're barely utilised at all, and by the end of it have become basically glorified background characters. Eventually just becomes the Arco and Diana show, and any potential these two had is completely wasted. Remember the second OVA, where Arco, Lotte and Susie's friendship was what ultimately won the day? Remember how Arco and Diana's rivalry was barely a footnote in that OVA? Well here, they've done the exact opposite, and it's Arco and Diana's rivalry which is the central focus, and her friendship with Lotte and Susie is barely a factor. I suppose when Arco's in with the popular girls, she doesn't need these dweebs anymore.
He really doesn't hate Arco, honest.
This is why I lumped the two of them together. If the show's going to write them off as just being Arco's friends, then why shouldn't I? As I said at the start, I know a lot of stuff had to be cut out due to the deal with Netflix. But to cut out who are meant to be the main character's 2 best friends, that's just insanity! And I know a thing or two about insanity. I'm sorry if I'm making a big deal out of this.
What do you mean you're sorry? You love being dramatic and putting on a performance. It's your stick.
It was just such a shame for me to see these two characters, especially Susie, be so badly underutilised. Thanks for that, Netflix! Another character affected by this is Amanda O'Neill. The creator even said that she's one of the characters he wanted to devote a lot more of the story to, but unfortunately had to cut it due to Netflix. And her character really does suffer for it in my opinion. Now don't get me wrong, I like her character, but I feel she's very badly underdeveloped. I know she's a very popular character, but I myself can't get behind her the way that others do. Had she had a bit more time put into her, like the creator wanted, I would probably be able to get behind her more. But as things stand, to me she's just the bad girl. That's it. That's her whole character. Chalk it up to personal preference though. I can't really get behind characters like that unless they have some real proper development to them. The episodes devoted to her were good, but she herself didn't really gain anything out of them. No lesson about her hot-headedness, no learning to value friendship over thrills, nothing. She just had an attitude. She's just how Japan pictures all Americans ever. Oh, and don't get me wrong, Constance and Jasminka are one-note characters as well. Heck, Jasminka didn't even have an episode dedicated to her. But the difference for me is, I found them both funny and entertaining. Heck, any episode with their comedy in was some of the best in my opinion. Constance even had homages to Gurren Lagann in her episode, which I appreciate greatly. So again, I suppose my problem with Amanda O'Neill's character is just that personally it has to be developed more for me to get behind it. Oh, and while we're on the subject, where is my Jasminka episode? Constance gets a focus episode, so why not Jasminka?
Wouldn't a Jasminka focused episode just be 22 minutes of her eating?
To me, that would be a great episode!
You can get behind that, but not the 2 Amanda focused episodes we did have. You really are insane.
Going back to Constance, though, I see a lot of potential in her. She has the aptitude for science. Do you reckon she'd want to become my student?
Ahem! What about me?
I suppose I should mention the new character Andrew as well.
Don't change the subject!
Andrew is an interesting one for me. While I don't have anything against his character per se, I do have to question the point of his inclusion. I know the creator wanted to give Akko a tie to the Muggle world, and that's fine in concept. But one thing I do think really worked to the OVA's credit is that there was no central male characters, and as such, no forced underlying love story just for the sake of having one. However, as if to appease the trope, they felt the need to add the forced romance in here. I'm sorry, but it did feel really forced to me. Not that it doesn't have its moments, but it was just really forced. Now, one thing I will credit the series on, there's no kiss scene or outright admission of love. Well, save for one episode, but it was played for comedy. So I suppose the argument could be made that their relationship building could be taken as romantic, or just as friendship building, but to me they seem to be pushing towards the romance angle, especially because of the aforementioned episode. Ergo, that's how I took it. That's a shame too, because for a series that broke out of so many cliches, why did it then have to go into the biggest cliche of them all? Still, I suppose if you choose to take their relationship as just a friendship, then I guess it did break out of the tradition? But to me that should have been more overt. Not enough series make the point that two people of the opposite sex can just be friends without there being any sort of underlying attraction. Right, Emma?
A, we're not friends. 2, I thought you weren't going to talk about ships.
Well, this is a minor exception because I'm talking about relationship interpretation and how that was for me personally, but also making the point that it is all subjective and it really comes down to how the individual chooses to take it.
I don't think the internet actually knows what subjective means, Kay.
As for Andrew as a character, he's fine. He's the cliched jerk at first who eventually begins to warm up, but I've seen it done worse. Well, I've also seen it done better. My only major critique of him is that his character development seems to happen very quickly. I knew he was ultimately going to come around on his opinions on magic, but it all seemed to happen very suddenly just because the plot demanded it. But, like with a lot of things, this can probably be chalked up to the Netflix issues I've been mentioning throughout. As for his friend Frank, why was he even a thing? His subplot about his romance with Lotte goes nowhere and is never actually brought up after its introduction.
You know you can't avoid who are essentially the real stars of the show for much longer, right?
You refer, of course, to Ursula and Qua, right? Yes, for a show entitled Little Witch Academia, there does seem to be an awful lot of focus on the older witches. I feel it's very hard to comment on both of them without going into spoilers though. However, I will say though that Ursula was much better handled here than she was in the OVAs, where, let's be honest here, her secret about her double life was barely an afterthought. She's utilised much better here and serves the purpose she should. Being Akko's mentor. Seeing a lot of herself in the main character and passing on her knowledge onto her. I liked how her situation of being the fish out of water with the other teachers mirrored that of Akko's situation with the other students. However, what I really liked though is while she is an innocent goofball, much like Akko early on, we quickly see her growing a backbone and standing up for herself and Arco. I can really get behind a woman like that. And for me to say that about a teacher, that's a big deal.
Right, your thing about teachers. Amazing how my mentor can't see the irony of that.
I'm certain in another timeline somewhere, she and I are very happy.
What does that mean?
Oh, it's a new rule of the internet I found it, Emma. If she exists, KHF has a family with her in an alternate timeline.
You can't be serious.
Oh, I most certainly am.
Is that even possible?
It is for a genius who knows how to manipulate the infinite timelines. That's right! I have all the waifus, baby!
I'm utterly speechless. That may actually be the most despicable thing you've ever said.
As for Qua, the only thing I can comment on about her without going into spoilers is... does she remind anybody else of a female commoner? Am I the only one seeing this? I suppose it does make sense given the team, but it did stand out to me. I wonder what would happen if I introduced her to C mode. Would that freak him out? What kind of reaction would he have? This seems like an experiment worth pursuing. In any case, I really don't want to spoil anything, but... Qua never really did it for me. I don't know, I would have liked to have known more about her and what her motivations are besides just... science. Because that's my thing! Her research, though flawed in so many fundamental areas that I could make a whole video on it, but I shan't because you probably won't be able to comprehend it, is an interesting premise. And one that feels like it's ripped straight out of a Green Lantern story, but that's neither here nor there. But hey, I can't fault her on her research being wrong. She's not me, so of course it's going to be wrong.
You really don't respect anybody but yourself, do you?
Hi, I'm Dr. KHF. Have we met? But as I said, you'd think she'd be the character that I, of all people, would be most interested in, but no, sadly. Most of the time she's just looming in the background eating noodles. Having a character do that is fine in concept, but we have to have some sort of inkling as to what she's doing and why she's doing it in order for her to be interesting to me, and we don't really get that until the tail end of the series. Still, I can't fault the core of her plan, because if there's one thing that English people get more emotional about than anything else in the world, it's football results. And that's the harsh truth of the matter, I'm not even making a joke there.
I would have thought you'd have brought Diana up before this point.
Ah, that is because I wanted to save the best till last, my dear. You see, in my opinion, Diana is the best developed character in the series, bar none. We actually see her go through a character arc. She starts off as cold and snobby and stuck up, or how Japan picture us English folk, I guess.
Not that it's unfounded, Mr. I'm smarter than everybody else.
Once again, Emma, I literally am smarter than everybody else. Well, except for my mentor. But where was I before I was talking about my wonderful self? Ah, yes. Diana starts off as an ice queen, but as the series goes on, we see her begin to defrost and become a much more caring and gentle character. It all felt completely natural as well. Not once did I ever feel it betrayed the kind of character that she is. She's still serious and proud by the end, but she's more willing to open up and let people help her. Her closed-off attitude really does play off Arco's open and upbeat nature very well. What I did really like in the early episodes is that while she did come off as cold and clearly didn't care much for Arco, she never came off as antisocial. What I mean by that is, she was always willing to help her fellow students and give them advice in their studies. A lesser anime would have had her be completely cold, never talking to anybody, but everybody would still gush over her saying that she's so cool! I thought her relationship with Arco was handled very well. It was nice to see it grow from outright dismissal to begrudging respect to genuine respect, and then finally to outright acceptance of her as a fellow witch and as a friend. Diana is a character where I felt the development really seemed to stick. By the time we learn her backstory, I felt genuinely bad for her, because I'd grown to care for her as a character so much. As is often the case in fiction, it's the rival character that ends up being more interesting than the main character. By the end of the series, she is no longer
the biggest white bitch who ever lived. It's Diana Cavendish. You could almost say she absorbed all the development Andrew was meant to get.
Oh, and one thing I'm extremely happy about is that they avoided doing the love triangle thing, considering her and Andrew are meant to be childhood friends. so many anime fall into that trope that it's gotten sickening. I mentioned something before about how in fiction they can never seem to have two people of the opposite sex just be friends or old acquaintances without there being some sort of underlying sexual tension. However, they somehow managed to pull that off successfully with Diana and Andrew. She doesn't seem to hold any sort of romantic attraction for him, not even a Cinderella, well, I'm going to pretend that I don't care, but I secretly want Senpai to notice me, sort of thing. For a 2017 anime, that is a huge deal! My hat is off to the creators for avoiding that pitfall. Not even some stupid twist about the two of them having an arranged marriage. And believe me, I thought they were going to go for that angle, but thankfully they didn't. All the crap I give this series about introducing a love interest, I am really glad that they avoided the love triangle cliche and showed that, yes, two people can have known each other since childhood, but just be friends. Well, I do believe we've come to an end for characters.
Wait, what about Hannah and Barbara?
Who?
You know, Hannah and Barbara, Diana's two bully friends.
Wait, those two had names? I thought they were just Jerk 1 and Jerk 2.
Yes, they did. And I'm sure there's a few people out there who want to know your thoughts on them.
They're literally one-note joke characters about how bullying is wrong and how you'll encounter nasty people in school. Well, the same is true for life, I suppose.
So, how about that music, eh?
Oh, the music here was absolutely wonderful. Every track was a joy to listen to and fit every situation perfectly. Not that I could say I'm surprised with Trigger, though. But the same was true of the OVAs as well. Clearly a lot of love went into these soundtracks and I really commend them for it. There is some really beautiful music here. So?
So what?
Are you going to say it?
Absolutely not.
Say it!
No.
Say it, Emma, or we won't go back to forensic studies.
So what's the word, Doc? What's your final diagnosis on this series? Gosh, I hate you.
Well, my dear, after careful analysis I can conclude that this series is worth watching. It's by no means a masterpiece, and it didn't quite build on its world as well as it could have. However, it's still an entertaining thrill ride throughout. It's fun, it's funny, it's clever, and it's just so likeable. The characters are charming, the adventure is mostly exciting. Oh, and did I mention that soundtrack? It might not be for some, and that is perfectly fine, but I'd say at the very least it's worth a shot. You might just find you really come to enjoy it. So, that is my review. Make sure that you follow me on Instagram and Twitter at KHFMcAwesome for all the latest news and updates on my work.
So, what's next for you then?
Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some incubators to probe. What's this? It's left over from MCM. Actually, this might be worth keeping around. Just found I had an old ad in my lab coat pocket. I was like, how the heck did that get there? It's Dr. KHF actually sending me things? But worried that my character's getting a mind of his own. I will say though that Ursula is much better handled here, much more so than she was in the OVAs, where, let's face it, what the hell? I can really get behind. I mentioned before about how in fiction they can never seem to have two people of the opposite sex just be friends or old acquaintances without there being some sort of underlying sexual tension. But somehow they thankfully managed to pull that off with Akko and Andrew. Almost had it!